scoot towards the back.
Great.
People can see you on big screens. We're just hearing you through the computer, the laptop.
Okay, all right. And then what I'll do is I'll just use some cues from you all from time to time. If for some reason you stop hearing me, or if I start fading in and out, I'll try to speak as clearly as I possibly can. So, well, good afternoon to you all in Utah. Have you had a pretty good afternoon so far? Yeah. Oh, well, if you hear any background noise from my end, I'm actually sitting in my office in my home here in Emporia, and it's a beautiful day here. It's a little bit windy, but other than that, the temperature is gorgeous, and it's so pretty that I think I have a neighbor who's mowing the lawns. So I hope you don't have that background noise from time to time. So if you hear something, that's probably what's going on. I am really happy to be able to visit with you all today about collection development, questions, concerns, and some ways that we make decisions, certainly in the context of an academic library, on what we purchase, particularly when it comes to electronic resources, because as we know, so many things are going electronic anymore, and you all are a good example of that. You are not physically in Emporia, you're in Utah, so obviously you're going to be very much using anything from our library in Emporia that would be full text or full text available in different databases or electronic journals and so forth. So I'll give you a little bit of a background on what my role is in the library. Again, I'm Cynthia Kane, and I actually have two titles now. One title is Director of Instruction, and in that context, I oversee our different instruction programs, both for the undergraduate and graduate levels, for the whole of Emporia State University. It doesn't mean that I teach everything, but I oversee a lot of different ways that we're delivering instruction and so forth. But the second hat I wear is really what has to do with what I'm going to be talking about with you all today, and why Dr. Smith had asked me if I could join you all today. And that is directing and overseeing assessment in the library. And assessment can take a lot of different forms. Assessment can mean, does our library's webpage actually work the way that it should? Is it really intuitive? In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. How do we find out a little bit more about that? Assessment can also mean the physical space of a library. So for our students that are face-to-face in Emporia, sometimes what we need to think about a little bit more carefully would be, can people actually find the circulation desk? Can they find the reference desk? Where are they going to study, and why would they choose to study maybe in one area of the library as opposed to another area? And so that's part of what assessment is all about. It really isn't intended to be punishing or punitive. Basically, assessment, I think about the best way to put it is, you take the data that you can gather at that particular point in time, but you don't use it in a vacuum. You apply it with other things that you know in order to go forward, to make better decisions on anything that you happen to be doing, and then it's a continuous cycle. You just do that all over again. So in other words, you just don't file data in a file electronically or physically in a file drawer and you forget about it. So the assessment part really has to do in terms of what we choose in the library, both for print resources, books, print periodicals, and so forth, and then also electronic resources in particular. So Dr. Smith and I were doing really a good email exchange earlier this week, and I thought it might be rather interesting to show you all a little bit. If you haven't had a chance to see any of this yet, I thought it might be interesting to show you how different databases can help to generate what we would call usage statistics. And have you all had a chance to talk yet about the whole idea of usage statistics and how that can show how a particular resource is being utilized or not? Okay, see some nods of the head. Okay, what I want to do is show you that in a little bit more of a practical level. So I'm going to be sharing my screen with you, but I also want you all to be thinking about some different questions as we go along during this period. And I mentioned real quickly at the beginning, and I'll highlight this again, I am recording this Zoom session. So when we finish, I'll go ahead and I'll convert it into a YouTube video. I will send Dr. Smith the link, and then that way you can go back and refer to that as much as you need to. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share one part of my screen with you. And I'm going to get down over here. This is exactly where I need to be. Okay, are you all seeing a spreadsheet now that actually is an Excel spreadsheet? Okay, so you are seeing that. Okay. I'm going to move this away here. Go away. There we are. So this is an example of something that I generated. As you can see from the date run, this is a report that I actually generated on January 31st, 2017. So I did this early in this calendar year. Now, this might look like a lot of gobbledygook, but I'm going to kind of put this more in context. So we have a database that we've actually subscribed to for a long time in our library. The general name of the database is Newsbank. However, we actually subscribe to a package within Newsbank, and it is generally called Kansas Newspapers. So what in the world does that mean? Well, the Kansas Newspapers package, which is on this tab, is actually a sub-collection of 6 Kansas newspapers. Now, this is an agreement that our library made a number of years ago when we were in a consortium, and the consortium was called the Regents Libraries Database Consortium. Something that often happens with collection development is that if you're a library working independently, you might have a particular price for a database, a subscription price, like subscribing to a magazine or a journal. And a vendor or a publisher of that database might give you a certain price. However, if you are able to go in with other similar libraries, perhaps community college libraries, public libraries, other academic libraries, you might be able to negotiate a better price from that database vendor than if you were doing that individually. Sometimes I get asked by SLIM students, well, how much is a specific database? How much, could I reasonably expect to pay? And I hate to give you this answer, but the answer is, it all depends. It depends upon if you're doing that individually. Often with an academic library, it can depend upon the number of FTE or full-time equivalent students that are enrolled at your college or your university. Sometimes it can depend upon the type of academic library. A 2-year institution might get a little bit of a better price, for example, than a 4-year institution, a graduate institution, or an institution such as Emporia State that does offer one PhD program in the School of Library and Information Management. So we never really know. So with this package, probably I'd say about 15 years ago, we went in with the Regents Libraries Database Consortium because, think back to 15 years ago. What was the internet like 15 years ago? A lot of things have changed. Exactly. Many, many things have changed. So 15 or so years ago, this would have been about the only way that we could have offered fairly convenient electronic access to a lot of different newspapers in the state of Kansas. Now, here's the kicker. This is our Kansas Newspapers package from Newsbank. These are our statistics from July 1st, 2016 to December 31st, 2016. So I wanted to see how many times people had actually been retrieving full text articles from each of these newspapers in the Kansas Newspapers package. Now, this is not too surprising when we take a look at this. The Emporia Gazette, okay, our local newspaper here in Emporia, look at this. For some reason, it looks like in July and August of 2016, nobody was using Newsbank as our access point to read articles from the Emporia Gazette. But then look at this, September 35, October 25 full text articles, November, oh wow, there was a jump there, look at that, from 25 to 237, and then December it dropped back down to 14. Now, with these other newspapers, the Wichita Eagle, Manhattan Mercury, Topeka Capital Journal, Kansas City Star, and then finally the Lawrence Journal World, we're not really getting as many full-text articles that people have actually been reading, which tells me, first of all, that probably, at least here in Emporia, people really want access to back articles, to archival access to the Emporia Gazette. But why in the world did we have this jump from October to November? That's something that I would have to go find out in terms of being director of assessment. So what I would probably do at this point is go back to some of our librarians. And I would say, do you all know of any assignments that different faculty were giving that might have had to do with local history, for example, or local stories? And maybe that would account for this spike in November of 2016. There's something else I want to highlight for you, though, too, and this is I'm going to get a little bit more into some technical information. And by the way, please stop me at any point if you have questions or if anything, doesn't come across. Are you still all hearing me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great, thanks. So I wanted to show you a couple of other technical aspects, and then we're going to get into an actual vendor, ProQuest. And if everything works well and fingers crossed, I'm going to show you how I generate a usage statistics report for one or more databases. So looking here, 311 articles were found in full text and were actually retrieved in full text from July to December of 2016 in HTML. Absolutely nothing was found as a PDF article. Really simple reason for that. Newsbank, in and of itself, with all the newspapers that it has, and Newsbank has a ton of national and international newspapers, they don't do a PDF. All of their articles are just HTML full text, which we know is just basically the text of the article. So the flip side of this is I can get into older issues of the Emporia Gazette back to 2002 in this instance, but with Newsbank, at least with the Newsbank access, I'm not going to be getting photos. I'm not going to be getting any charts. I'm not going to be getting any illustrations. It's just the pure text of the article. All of these factors actually do go into different decisions that we make as librarians when we decide on what databases we might want to keep, what databases possibly to cancel, and then going back to our patrons and to our constituents and saying, what is it that you really need? What format do you really need? Now, the other thing on this is, right now for us here in Kansas, the only other access to the Emporia Gazette in terms of archival access, back files, would be on microfilm. That's it. There aren't any other electronic resources or any other databases right now that would include any type of archival coverage of the Emporia Gazette. So what does that mean for us as a result? It means that we probably are going to have to hang on to our Newsbank subscription. Now, is it possible through Newsbank just to subscribe to the Emporia Gazette, given the fact that we don't really have high usage points for any of these others? No, it is not. I've been visiting with the vendor quite a bit about this. So it looks like this is what we kind of need to hang on to for right now, given the fact that, number one, we know it's being used. Number two, we kind of still need to find out what was going on in November of 2016, where there was that spike of usage for the Emporia Gazette. And number three, given the fact that if we actually cancel this specific subscription, our distance education students who might want to use the Emporia Gazette, or just people in Emporia who just can't necessarily get to the library when it's convenient, they're not going to be able to access back files of the Emporia Gazette in any other way. So that's just a real quick overview of how we might use a report from usage statistics that we generate from vendors to help inform our decision-making processes when it comes to databases. One thing I wanted to show you too here, and this is getting to be a little bit more technical. Not all databases and not all vendors conform to this, but the vast majority do. There is a system that's called the Counter code of practice or counter-compliance statistics. And basically, counter-compliance statistics simply mean that different vendors, different databases will actually use the same codes, basically the same algorithms, to generate like statistics so that I can compare different types of statistics in similar fashion across a wide range of vendors and across a wide range of databases. So a good example of this is R4. This is Journal Report 1. Journal Report 1 would be a counter-compliance statistic. Basically, that means that if I run this same type of report in a different database, it's going to give me the same kind of information. So in other words, it's going to give me the full text reporting. When I report back to our dean about different usage statistics for databases, I usually will give her two reports. One would be the Journal Report 1 for full text retrievals if I'm looking at a database that does have full text access. And another one would be what would be called a platform report. And a platform report will give me information such as the number of searches. How many times in a given month have people actually gone in and searched a database? The number of sessions. Within the number of sessions, that can also be the number of times that people have actually gone into a database. They may or may not have searched it, but they've actually gone into that specific database, whether it's on campus or off campus. So often what we do is we compare those kinds of numbers because we want to see, are people actually accessing a database in the first place? If they are they indeed searching a database? And then we can couple that, if it's a full text database, with the Journal Report 1. Once they're in the database, are they indeed finding and retrieving full text information? So that, in a nutshell, is the way that we might use some type of usage report for statistics. So what I want to do now is I'm going to go ahead and stop this share for just a second. And I'm going to go into another screen. And I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that this is still, aha, here we go. Let's see if I can pull this one up for you all too. Okay. Are you now seeing a different spreadsheet that has JR1, number of successful full text article requests by month and journal?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so this is a different database, and I wanted to show you how we would use the same types of statistics across fiscal years to compare and contrast what's going on in different disciplines, and again, getting a little bit more information through usage statistics. So this spreadsheet actually represents, it's not really a database, it's more of an access point, and it's called Science Direct. Now, Science Direct is actually from a publisher called Elsevier. And through this publisher, we actually have a number of electronic journal subscriptions. And what we try to do with our Science Direct Elsevier package is really focus those specific subscriptions upon disciplines that we know in particular need distance education access, or basically need full text access. And SLIM is probably one of the best examples that I can think of. So I thought you all might kind of get a kick out of seeing this. So this is a report that I prepared a few months ago, again, for my dean. So what I did with this was, let's go back to fiscal year 12. There we go. So this is the Science Direct package that we subscribed to back in the fiscal year of 2012. And we do have, as you can see, quite a few electronic journals. So these are all electronic journals that are in here. So with this, I decided it would be interesting to take a look at the titles and then do some comparisons. And basically what I did with this was I went back after I downloaded this report from Science Direct, and I sorted the titles according to the number of successful article requests. So you're going to see something over here. Let's see if I can scroll this over anymore. Yeah, here we go. So here's the year to date. So again, this was for fiscal year 2012. Do you see the top two journals? Is that a big surprise? Probably not. No. The top two journals in terms of full text article requests from 2012 were Library and Information Science Research and the Journal of Academic Librarianship. Look who we're serving. We're serving a tremendous distance education population with our SLIM program. We have you all in Utah, we have Oregon, we have Colorado, we're going to have South Dakota very soon, and even here in Kansas, we have a contingent or a cohort group in Overland Park, which is about 1.5 hours from Emporia, but the students still are not necessarily coming to the Emporia campus. And even here in Emporia, we often will consider our students not really distance education, but we have students that just come to Emporia on weekends to take their classes just like you all do in Utah. So they're not in Emporia during the week either. So that's not too surprising. Now, I thought this was kind of interesting. The arts and psychotherapy, that actually had 102 full text article requests in the year of 2012. Now, I happen to know a reason for that. And the reason is that, as you know, I am your librarian liaison for the School of Library and Information Management, but I'm also the librarian liaison for psychology and for counselor education here at ESU. So in counselor education, we have a very large graduate art therapy program, and I do a lot of work with those students as well. The arts and psychotherapy is probably one of their premier journals. That's really one of their seminal journals, and that's where they find a lot of articles. So that's not too surprising that that would also be getting a lot of full text access and a lot of full text article requests. So I did the same thing basically for each subsequent fiscal year, going up to what we just completed with fiscal year 2016. And I'm finding that actually things really haven't changed that much between 2012 and 2016. We still have the Journal of Academic Librarianship and Library and Information Science Research. Those have actually gone up pretty much every year in terms of their full text article requests. There's the arts and psychotherapy again. Personality and individual differences, there's probably something going on in psychology or maybe some related fields that I would need to know a little bit more about. As we scroll down, we see that there are some others that maybe haven't been accessed that much. Now, library collections, acquisitions, and technical services. Don't be alarmed by this one, because you might be a little bit surprised. You might look at that and say, there were only 14 full-text article requests? Now, wait a second. You know, library science students have to be using this journal electronically. Well, the reason it's appearing this way on the Science Direct Elsevier report is that, I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago, maybe only about 2, library collections, acquisitions, and technical services actually changed vendors. It's no longer available through Elsevier. It's actually available now through a vendor called Taylor and Francis. So, as an assessment person, I would have to go back to the Taylor and Francis vendor interface, pull out usage statistics for the Taylor and Francis journals, and then see how many of those articles are being accessed in full text. And I can tell you that library collections, acquisitions, and technical services is being requested a lot through Taylor and Francis, so it is getting used. So that's something also that I have to keep in the back of my mind, and I have to be aware of different vendors, different interfaces, different publishers that will change from time to time, because I have to be able to explain to my dean or to other people in higher administration why something might look like a little bit of an anomaly. So that's a good example of that. So again, I just wanted to show you that this is the way that we can use this for partial decision making. Dr. Smith and I have had some really good conversations about this, because one thing that I think you do have to be careful about with usage statistics, it informs your decision making. It is not all of your decision making. And I can give you some good examples of that. Let's say, and probably some of you or some of your other colleagues or friends have had this particular example or this particular experience. Let's say that you're trying to get into our library's website, Emporia State University, and you're looking for the full text of an article. And for whatever reason, technologically, it just simply is not working. And you may have had that experience probably at one time or another. Hopefully you haven't, but it is a reality that that does happen. So we might not discover for a while that there's a problem in the access electronically to the full text of an electronic journal, mainly because it's hard to keep up with everything. So we might not realize that there's a problem with an access point until someone reports it to us, and then we go in and we realize the IP address has changed. That happens quite frequently. The URL that the publisher is using for the electronic full text has changed. For some reason, we didn't get that information or it slipped through the cracks. So when I go back to run usage statistics for that specific electronic journal, it might look as if there was a dip, that there weren't as many people that were accessing the full text electronically. Now, my first inclination hopefully would not be, well, obviously nobody's using this journal. We need to cancel it. So, done deal. I need to find out a little bit more. So whenever I see usage statistics for electronic journals that we subscribe to that have rather low accesses, we're just not, there just isn't that much in terms of the electronic full text access, that's when I start asking a lot of questions. I try to figure out, is there a problem technically that people can't get into the particular journal? And then beyond that, that's when I would probably go back to my librarian colleagues that work with different disciplines. And I might say, can you go talk with the faculty in your discipline? And can you go find out a little bit more? Is this a journal that's even useful anymore? Are there other journals out there that we need to be subscribing to that have better information than this one does? Do they know that we actually have the electronic access to this journal? Maybe they don't. And if they don't know about it, then they're not going to be using it. So in other words, with usage statistics, it is again a starting point for decision making, but in terms of true assessment, you do need to keep asking a lot of other questions and think about the questions that are prompted from the data and then go on from that point. So does that kind of make sense? Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop my share on this, and I'm going to see if I can pull up, and I have to remember, I apologize because I have to remember where in the world I put this on my screen. Don't think it was, that wasn't that. Sorry about that. Okay, let me go in here. I believe it is on this one. And, aha, here we go. Okay, I'm going to log back in here. And pardon me for just a second because I'm going to check something real quick here. And I want to get back in. Here we go. Get in here and paste that. And let's see if I can get back in here. And this will let me log in. Perfect. Yes, this is exactly where I needed to be. So are you all seeing a screen now that says ProQuest Administrator Module?
Yeah.
Okay, you are seeing that. Awesome. Okay, so I thought it might be kind of interesting to show you what it looks like from the administrator point of view. ProQuest is a vendor, so that's not the actual database itself. ProQuest actually has a lot of different databases that it offers through the ProQuest searching interface, and basically as a vendor and a publisher. And we do have several that we do pull in through the ProQuest interface. So when I am logged in as an administrator, I can go to usage statistics or usage reports. And there are several things that I can do, and this is pretty typical of different vendors. You can request usage reports for generally about any time period that you would want. I am usually busy doing a lot of other things, so but while I would like to try to run usage statistics every month, realistically, it just simply doesn't happen. So I sometimes will run usage reports for different databases every 3 months. So I will generally wait until about the first or second or even the third business day of that subsequent month, and then maybe run a usage report for statistics for the past 3 months or the past 6 months. And I really try to keep up with that because I want to take a look at different trends, and I also want to compare my reports to past years to, again, see what's going on or if there's something else that we need to know about. Or you can schedule them. You can schedule usage reports to be delivered to your email if you are an administrator in this particular regard. And you can do that basically schedule one for every month or every 3 months. I should probably do that, but I sort of like to do the request usage reports. And the reason is I like to kind of get into detail. I sort of like to get into different things. So I was telling you about the counter reports. So if I did a counter for Journal Report 1, this is again where I would be getting those journal, those full text retrievals of journal articles. So I could do that with counter report, Journal Report 1. If I wanted a platform report, which is again where I would be getting the number of sessions, the number of searches, and so forth, basically the activity of a particular database, I would go to the platform report 1. Or I can do, in this particular instance, ProQuest offers me summaries of database activity. So I'm going to go to database activity in detail, and let's see what was going on with the ProQuest databases just for 1 month, for March. Now, the delivery method, you can see that you can choose different ways. You can just view that on a web page if you just want a quick snapshot of what's going on with the usage report. You can email a report to yourself if you want, or you can download it. I will generally download reports because I can download them in a spreadsheet format then that I can turn around and convert back into Microsoft Excel. And I like to do that because I like to do data visualization. I like to take my data in a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet and then convert it into pie charts or bar charts or something where I can actually see some different trends. But for right now, we're just going to go ahead and view this report on a web page. And we're going to wait for that to do its thing. Oh, this is perfect. This is exactly what I wanted to show you. So this database activity detail for the ProQuest databases captures a lot of what I might want to share with our dean and what I would want to share with other librarians. So this is what was happening in the ProQuest databases that we subscribed to in March of 2017. ABI Inform, some of you may be familiar with that. That is a business-related database, so it has a lot of business journals. So it looks like it was actually searched 513 times, so it was used quite a bit. In March, there were 103 citations or abstracts that at least were viewed. Any full text format, so that would be both HTML and PDF, it looks like there were 527 full text articles that were actually viewed. And that total is actually a total of the citation abstract and the any full text format. So I generally don't look at that as much as I'm looking at the any full text format and the number of searches. The MLA International Bibliography, we noticed that it was searched 735 times, so that's mainly in the humanities and the languages. We had 332 citations or abstracts that were viewed from that. The reason that this is 0 is that the MLA International Bibliography is not a full-text database. So again, very interesting distinction and an important distinction to make. And as we keep going, this one is kind of near and dear to my heart because of my other work in psychology and counselor education, psych articles and psych info. So I teach this one a lot. It looks like with psych info, that's getting used, which I'm thrilled about. So it looks like with psych info, that was searched in March 2,432 times. There were 3,459 citations or abstracts that were viewed. and 106 full-text articles. Now, the reason for that is that PsycInfo, kind of like MLA, PsycInfo is not a full-text database in and of itself, but it goes out and it links to other full-text accesses, including psych articles. So that's why that number looks a little bit skewed. Psych articles is actually a full-text database. Psych articles winds up being a majority of journals that are published by the American Psychological Association from their beginning to the present date, and they are in PDF. So Psych Articles is a full-text database. So it really didn't get searched as much by itself. People tend to search PsycInfo for more comprehensive searching, but from the Psych Articles database, we wound up having 805 full-text articles. So you can see we actually got a lot of information there. And this is pretty much repeated with what we have here. But that database summary in detail, I'm going to go back to this tab, is often one that I will use when I just want a quick snapshot, or if my dean or another of my colleagues might say, hey, Cynthia, can you tell me, I've been teaching this specific database to students, but is it actually getting used? I can't do that with every particular vendor, but I can go back to different database vendors and I can pull similar reports basically any time that I would want to. So again, I can do basically a monthly report, bi-monthly, 3 months, whatever, and I can send people the information that they need so that they know that different things are going on. At this point, I would really be interested for any discussions and any questions, because I've talked quite a bit about usage reports and then how we use those. And I know that we have a lot of other collection development issues. What questions are out there that you all have? And Dr. Smith, what questions are also out there?
I have a question to ask immediately.
Yes.
They're lurking right here.
Yes.
And first of all is, how common is it for a journal to switch publishers?
Oh, I am so glad that you asked that. I don't have a sense that it's that common, but on the other hand, it is happening frequently enough that it actually takes a little bit of time for us to keep up with the different changes. I mentioned, the library collections and technical services, and that was the one that switched to Taylor and Francis from Elsevier. We have had, in the last, I would say probably about in the last 2 years, we have had, and this is a real rough estimate right now, probably about 15 to 20 journals that were published by different, I take that back, let me back up. We had about 15 to 20 journals, and these are electronic journals again, that were and are still being published by the University of Chicago Press. Those journals were available through another full-text database called JSTOR, and that may sound familiar to some of you. JSTOR is primarily an archival access to electronic journals, but it does actually also act as a vendor interface for some current journals. So this package that was from the University of Chicago Press wound up being pulled from JSTOR, and I believe that was a particular publisher decision. So that was an example of a package that didn't change publishers, but they changed interfaces. They basically changed their access. So when we found that out, I had to get in gear, which was not a huge thing at all, but I went into JSTOR and I isolated those journals being published by the University of Chicago Press in terms, again, of their full text access points. Were they actually being used? Were they being accessed? And were they core to our academic mission? And we found that there were some that probably were not that core, and we worked with faculty and we worked with students, but we also found that there were some that we really still needed to keep. So then we had to turn around and set up separate electronic subscriptions now with the University of Chicago Press in order to be able to preserve that electronic access. So journals change publishers, but publishers can also change their minds at any point on where they want their access to be coming from. Do they want it through an aggregate database, or do they want to just go on their own? And that, I can tell you, takes quite a bit of time to keep up with.
Okay, thank you.
That's a great question.
Questions from here? Yes, oh, lots of questions.
Oh,
Let's
great.
Karen, and then we'll go to Anne. So Karen.
Okay.
Can you hear me, Cynthia?
Can you speak up just a little bit more?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly now. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. I work in the interlibrary loan department at my institution.
Oh, yes.
We get a lot of requests for articles from our students that we actually have access to.
Yes.
What I'm curious about is how you account for that in your usage statistics.
Mm-hmm. Do you go ahead and do the interlibrary loan, or do you send them a message and say, actually, you do have access to this through our library, or access through a database in our library?
We go ahead and deliver it to them using the document delivery function.
Oh, okay. Okay. So basically, you're pulling it from the databases or the electronic access that you have, but you're doing document delivery.
That's right.
Okay. Okay. The reason I asked is that in that particular instance, I don't have any way, and I don't know of a way of disaggregating that information from usage reports or usage statistics, because it's just still going to come out as this was a full text access. I would, in that instance, probably have a really good visit with the interlibrary loan people, mainly because I would be I'm trying to figure out how to put this. I would be less concerned with the document delivery issue and much more concerned with how easy or how difficult it is to find the full text of that article through our databases or through our library catalog in the first place, because that tells me that, and who knows what it is, but that tells me that maybe we as the library need to take a little bit of a closer look, and are we making things maybe a little bit more confusing for our users than we need to. Now, having said that, I tell you, I'm not sure if there really is a good seamless way of making sure that people always get the full text of articles. We struggle with that one all the time as far as Emporia is concerned, with our distance education students, with our students on campus, with our faculty. There are just things that are just not intuitive. So that's where I would probably look and say, is there any way that we could just streamline this so that we're making that access easier for everybody? I hope that kind of helps.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. That's a great question.
Thanks, Anne.
Hi, Cynthia, can you hear me?
I sure can, Ann.
Okay, I have a question going back about a contract. So when when the publisher pulls out of your contract,
Mhm.
the agreement,
Mhm.
does that mean that you have to reevaluate your contract, or does it change in any way?
Well, that is a great question. I'm going to divide it into two parts, if you don't mind, because there are two things that can happen with publishers and electronic journals. And this is where I feel really, really old at this point, because I've been doing this kind of work for probably about 25 years now, and I've seen so many changes. So I kind of go from historical background. So what can happen with a publisher are two things. If we don't actually subscribe to the electronic journal as an electronic journal subscription, but we are just getting access to the electronic journal, basically to the full text, through an aggregate database. If a publisher decides at some point to pull its electronic access to journals from that aggregate database, there's not a thing we can do about it. That's beyond contracts. It's beyond anything else. That is between the vendor and the publisher. And publishers can and will do that at any point. Publishers can also change their embargo periods. And if that doesn't sound familiar, an embargo period can simply mean the amount of time that it takes for the electronic full text of a particular issue to be available through an aggregate database. So let's say, and I'm totally making this one up, National Geographic. Let's say that National Geographic publishes its current issue. And they decide that the electronic full text availability for that current issue is not going to be available in an aggregate database until 30 days after the publication of the print issue. So that's basically a month. That's an embargo of a month. An embargo can be 6 months, an embargo can be a year, 365 days, totally up to them. So if it's an aggregate database, we have no control over that. If it is a publisher for an electronic journal that we are subscribing to individually, well, what I would be doing again is looking at the usage statistics, and that it kind of goes back to Dr. Smith's question earlier. That can happen. We can have, it doesn't happen that often, but we can have situations in which suddenly the electronic journal through a publisher is no longer available, or they're making it available somewhere else. Again, that's where I would probably need to run usage statistics for that specific electronic journal and say, okay, this one's really being used. We're going to have to figure out what in the world we're going to do. Is it going to be available electronically somewhere else? Is it just not going to be available electronically? So in that case, do we pick up the print subscription? And if we pick up the print subscription, how do we guarantee that people are actually going to be able to see that, given the fact that people tend to access stuff electronically anymore? So it's all kind of a moving target. And I hope that I answered your question. I know I kind of had to divide it a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions?
These are great.
Before I ask another. Cynthia, the other day when you were talking about the new databases you're getting, or
yes,
at Emporia,
mm-hmm.
also were making a comment about looking at certain databases, because some databases you're looking at actually encapsulate databases that we currently have. Can you talk just a little bit about the state of change?
Absolutely.
In the database world.
Yes, yes, and thank you for bringing that up, because you know we did spend quite a bit of time talking about that when I was doing my presentation to the SLIM faculty last week. This is what I'm seeing right now, and I could be totally wrong about this. I am seeing a couple of things happening, and one of the biggest things I'm seeing happening is that the company EBSCO, EBSCO, if you all work in libraries already, you probably get your electronic and print journal subscriptions through EBSCO. Not always, but the vast majority of us do. EBSCO Host is also part of EBSCO, and EBSCO Host is the vendor interface that encompasses a number of databases. What I have seen happen, I would say for about the last 20 to 25 years, is that smaller companies and smaller publishers and vendors that used to offer databases have been kind of gobbled up by EBSCO. And I'm not exaggerating on that. So a good example of that would be the Library Literature and Information Science Full Text Database. And I know that you all know about this, you use it, we teach it. I mean, this is one of the big databases in our field. Library Literature and Information Science Full Text used to be a print index, along with a lot of other print indices, that were owned by a company called H.W. Wilson. H.W. Wilson then began offering these indices in electronic form, so basically offering them as electronic databases. And then they began to encompass full text, but they were still databases through H.W. Wilson, and then they were known as Wilson Web databases. A number of years ago, EBSCO bought out H.W. Wilson, and they bought out the Wilson Web databases. So the Library Literature and Information Science Full Text Database, which was a Wilson Web database, has now been incorporated, for lack of a better word, into a larger EBSCO host database, and that one is called Library and Information Science Source. And actually, let me go real quickly here, because we're done with this screen. We're going to go to the library's webpage, and I'm going to click on the Databases tab. And I believe that Dr. Smith has shared the handout that we have that talk about a lot of our new databases, and they are also listed on the right-hand side of our A to Z list of databases. So the one that I am mentioning, and I'm going to point out a couple more as well, is Library and Information Science Source. So Library and Information Science Source has been created by EBSCO. It actually encompasses all of library literature and information science full text of that database, plus a lot more information. It tends to index, and it also offers some full text of books, book chapters, I think some other reference sources, and so forth. So we're going to have to make a decision. If we keep Library and Information Science Source because it tends to be much more comprehensive, will we then cancel Library, Literature, and Information Science full text? Yes, with a caveat, because I would want to make sure, as the SLIM liaison, that indeed everything in one database is also included in the other database. So this is what is starting to happen more and more. And I tell you, EBSCO and EBSCO Host are really starting to kind of offer and buy up even more and more databases. And another real quick example of that is back up here, CINAHL Complete. CINAHL is a database that is for nursing and allied health. We have CINAHL with full text, but CINAHL Complete, yet again, encompasses everything in CINAHL with full text plus a lot of other sources. So we might then wind up canceling CINAHL with full text. I see that really happening with EBSCO because I really think that EBSCO is really kind of starting to create sort of their own databases, for lack of a better word, and then including more information. So we have to be aware of that.
Okay, I
Sure.
questions till the cows come home, but I want to make sure the students. Yes, and there's another question.
Oh, good.
Is there a database that you've canceled recently, and can you walk us through all the steps?
I sure can. Let me see if I can think of an example. Actually, yes, I can think of a very good example, and it indeed had to do with library and information science. We had for years subscribed to a database, and again, this is through EBSCO, that was called Senior High Core Collection, and that may sound familiar to some people. It was more of a selection tool for different books for senior high collections in school libraries, public libraries, and so forth. Well, that one came up for renewal, I guess it's probably been about a year and a half ago. Well, I ran the numbers on that. So I ran the usage statistics, and it really wasn't being used very much. But my next step then was to go not only to the SLIM faculty, but also to faculty in the English department and in the Teachers College. And the reason I did that was I knew that they were teaching, like, middle school, high school literature, basically teaching, training high school teachers and so forth. And I said, is this something that you really are going to be using, or are you using it right now? Or are there other databases that we have access to that are probably providing a little bit more information? Now, keep in mind, this was called Senior High Core Collection. But some of the feedback that I got from the SLIM faculty, I'm going to scroll down here, was that, and again, be kind of careful with the title of this, about 2 to 2.5 years ago, and Dr. Smith will remember this because he and I were communicating about it, the library picked up a subscription to something called Children's Literature Comprehensive Database. And it is an online database, as you can see. It includes book reviews about children's literature, but you can locate books by age level, grade level, reading levels, and so forth. So it goes up to the senior high level. Well, the feedback that we wound up getting from faculty was that they really weren't using Senior High Core Collection. They were probably okay with us canceling it, and they were actually happy with what they were getting with the Children's Literature Comprehensive Database. So there were two things that were going on there. First of all, we were communicating, and I share usage statistics because if I'm going to get any questions from other faculty, I don't hesitate to say, here are the numbers. As far as we can see, this is just simply not being used. Now, maybe you didn't know about it, maybe there was something else going on, but it isn't being used. And then second, these are the other databases that we have in this field of study. They are being used, but is this okay? Does this suit your information need? So based upon all that feedback and sharing, we did cancel the senior high core collection, but then that gave us the money that we needed to be able to keep subscribing to the Children's Literature Comprehensive Database, and then go ahead and be able to add some other databases. So that was with a lot of feedback, and we don't make those decisions in a vacuum.
Cynthia, can you just tell us what is the average length of a contract that you're entering into for databases?
Okay.
And is that changing?
Okay.
Remaining fairly constant? And
Mhm.
then my next part of that is, can you talk just a little bit of, are we essentially negotiating every contract ourselves, or are we in any consortia?
Okay, I'll go ahead and start with that first part of the question, and catch me if I don't answer everything, if you would. So in terms of length of contracts, most of the time we will go ahead and just do yearly contracts or yearly subscription periods. Now, that could be by fiscal year. It could be from July 1st to June 30th of a given year, but it could also be in a calendar year. It just depends on when we actually start and negotiate the contract in the first place. One reason that we tend to do yearly contracts is that Emporia State is a state institution. We have found that our business office can be a little bit hesitant, and I understand in times of budget cuts. A publisher can offer a discount for multi-year contracts, as you might imagine, sort of like if you're subscribing to a magazine or to a newspaper. But our business office is a little bit hesitant about multi-year contracts or multi-year agreements, because their rationale is, if something happens and the budget has to be slashed, are we in a contract that we really can't get out of? So sometimes we'd like to be in multi-year contracts, but at least for us with Emporia, we do yearly contracts. In terms of anything changing, let's see, Dr. Smith, can you go back and repeat some more of the question? I appreciate that. I'm challenging you, I'm sorry. I should have written that down.
You think, oh, do we do everything ourselves? Or
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Or are we in consortiums? Okay, thank you, thank you. See, I apologize. Old age is catching up with me. I'm so sorry. We are in a variety. At the beginning, I was mentioning the Regents Libraries Database Consortium, which is RLDC for short. We still have some databases that we do through the Regents Libraries Database Consortium, and we do get some price breaks on that. With the consortium, we're not doing the negotiating ourselves. We usually have somebody who is kind of an intermediary. So for RLDC, we have a librarian at Wichita State who actually does the negotiations with the different vendors, and then she sends out spreadsheets and to the other participants, and then we take a look and see if that pricing is still okay for us. However, we do have quite a few databases for which we are just negotiating individually. Now, would it be more advantageous to do consortium agreements? Yes and no, depending on what consortiums are out there in the first place. You kind of have to go look for consortiums, I guess has been my experience. We have one database, it's MathSciNet, and obviously that's for the mathematical and science folk. We actually subscribe to that one through another consortium that's called the Michigan Library Consortium. And I remember when we got into that one because when we were asking the vendor for pricing on that, the vendor actually volunteered the information to us that the Michigan Library Consortium was available and we might be eligible to participate in that, so we went with them. So that was good. So you kind of have to seek out consortiums. You can form something. I mean, libraries go together and form them. Now, in Utah, are there any statewide databases that are available for everyone?
Yes.
Pioneer, isn't it?
Pioneer. Okay. Oh, yes, Pioneer. Okay. Okay. That's a good example. Not necessarily. of a consortium as much as kind of, because that has to do more with a statewide agreement that's been made maybe with different publishers or different databases so that those can be freely available. In Kansas, through the State Library of Kansas, we have statewide databases both through EBSCO and I think a few through ProQuest as well. And the state of Kansas has made those agreements with the publishers, so they're paying for that access. And then those databases in turn can be made freely available for anybody here in the state of Kansas, and they're recognized by IP address, so you don't even have to log on to them. So we're still doing a lot individually, and I'm not necessarily seeing that ending because, again, you have to kind of go out and look for consortiums anymore.
Okay,
Yeah.
just to follow up on that.
Yes.
We haven't told the students this story, but several years ago, there was a huge to-do with the nature journals, essentially holding California to ransom.
Yes.
The strategy is that they were putting up the price for California, but leaving everybody else's price the same.
Yep.
The strategy being that gradually they would target individual states or individual sets of people to bump the price up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Isolate people so that if California is the only one getting a price increase,
right,
going to jump in and save California.
Right.
California did try to boycott it, but in the end couldn't do it.
Right.
So, Cynthia, can you talk, if we are negotiating every year, are you
Mm-hmm.
seeing prices going up every year? What's the sort of story at the moment?
Oh, yeah. Yes, and yes. Yes, we are still negotiating individually, and yes, I see a little bit of a price increase every year. Not with all of our individual databases, but with most of them. Now, that price increase will tend to work out to about, I'd say, about 1 to 5%, which sounds like a pretty big range, but it all depends. There really isn't any particular justification. Now, the problem with that is it tends to be price creep because, it's kind of like a series of 1,000 paper cuts. If something is increasing by 1 or 2% every year, you don't really notice it that much until you go back and look over the past 5 years and you think, whoa, that one really jumped. That price for that database was here 5 years ago and now it's here. Actually, that's a great question because I mentioned with my job as assessment, my library dean has asked me, and I'm in the middle of this right now, to prepare a comprehensive spreadsheet of all of our individual database subscriptions and our consortial ones as well. And to do, let's see, right now I'm taking it back to the fiscal year of 2012. So that's going to be about 5 to 6 years by the time I finish with that, to do that very comparison, because she really wants to get a better sense of how much these prices have actually increased in the last few fiscal year periods. And we don't really have that unless we actually have that on a spreadsheet to compare. So, but yeah, I keep seeing a little bit of a price raise every single year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, before I interrupt, are there any more questions that have sprung to mind at the moment? The students are just stunned.
Oh dear.
But Cynthia, one more thing, and I don't want to hang on to you forever because it's very generous of you to be with us on a Saturday afternoon.
Absolutely.
A little bit about ebooks.
Mm-hmm. Oh yes.
E-book subscriptions, which are slightly different from.
Oh boy. Yes. Oh yeah. We've been. I hate to say this because it sounds like all we're doing is talking, but we have been talking in the library for quite a while about how far to get into the whole concept of ebooks. Now, and I know that Slim has a great deal of interest. I think there are a lot of really neat projects that we could be pursuing, and that I think we would very much like to do. This is what we're finding with ebooks. And again, I'm talking more from an academic library standpoint as opposed to like a regular patron. So, regular patron standpoint, I have a Kindle. I adore it. We have access to the 3M Cloud Library through the State Library of Kansas, and I'm always downloading books on my Kindle from there and then having something to carry with me. So from a consumer recreational standpoint, I really, really do like ebooks. From an academic library's point of view, this is what we run into. There are different packages out there of ebooks. ProQuest has a package, and I know other vendors do as well. It would be more packages organized by subjects. And there are some different models out there in which if you participated with a publisher with a certain package, like humanities and social sciences, for example, you could pay a subscription price and then get access to those ebooks. And then if a particular ebook was retrieved a certain number of times, let's say five times for the sake of argument, then you would be prompted to have the option to purchase that ebook as opposed to just, accessing it through your subscription. And I'm rather interested in that model because that kind of jives in with PODs, purchase on demand, or basically PDA, patron-driven acquisitions. I'm sort of interested in that. Now, the whole thing you also get into with ebooks from academic libraries are technical issues. Is your library catalog, is basically your library system compatible? And if you have situations in which you have ebooks that are available through separate access as opposed through a package, how do you make those available? Are they downloadable as a PDF? Can they just be read on the screen? We do have a lot of questions from patrons who want to print out the ebooks because they like the print. Well, you can't always do that. You can print out a certain number of pages, but you really can't do that. So it's still, to me anyway, it's still kind of a sticky wicket in terms of the academic realm. And then the final thing on that consideration are textbooks. So as SLIM students, would it be more advantageous for you to have electronic access to a textbook as opposed to buying something in print? And I know there are a lot of different models out there, and then also having readings online. So there are a lot of different issues. We also would be working with a lot of different faculty across campus who may or may not be that supportive of the idea of ebooks, both in theory and in practice. So we have a ways to go, but I also think it doesn't mean that we should ignore the issue because I don't think we can.
Okay, thank you. Just
Sure.
interest, quite a lot of the readings this semester were
Mhm.
also articles where either I gave you a copy if it wasn't available through our databases, or you read in the database. How many of you read it electronically? And okay, so a lot of you read it. Who printed it out to read?
Okay.
Okay, that's interesting. So actually more people read it electronically than printed it out.
Okay.
Reasons I'm slightly fascinated.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't get any of the textbooks electronically.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yes, okay, too. Really interesting because 5 years ago, in my syllabus for the class, we weren't actually using Johnson, we were using Evans and Saponaro. And that was the first year I think it was available as an ebook. So on the syllabus, I put down, here it is as a print book, or you can get it as an ebook this way. And I was teaching 2 sections, so I had 50 students. And at the end of the semester, I said, by the way, how many of you bought the ebook? And the answer was 1 person bought the ebook, but she also bought a print copy.
Oh my goodness.
I can't study properly with her word properly.
Mhm.
How would you do that?
Well, she bought an ebook because she wanted to be able, like a lot of you, she traveled to class, wanted to be able to read it, but she wanted a print copy to stick her fingers in and put post-it notes in and underline.
Yep. Yeah.
I've had issues with location numbers instead of pages, or different between each ebook that you get.
Uh-huh.
It's really difficult to try and keep up and gauge, and you can't switch between them.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, right, right.
Mhm.
Really just like
Right.
where exactly that is.
Well, and that's interesting. I'll just say, I know that publishers on purpose quite often make the ebook not exactly the same as the print version, and precisely to discourage you from printing it out.
There you go. Yes. Yeah.
But Cynthia, I go back to the original ebooks.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, we were all using CRT screens at that time.
Yes.
appear in a little box in the middle, and there are going to be 3 lines of text.
Yes.
All designed to stop you printing it out.
Yes.
I don't know if you still get this, Cynthia, but I know 5 or 10 years ago, the #1 question librarians got about ebooks was, how do I print this out?
Do you know we still get that? We really do. And this is just a little bit of an aside, but we still get that question not only with some of the ebooks that we do have, but with other educational items, I guess is a good way to put it. I was dealing yesterday with a student who was in a business class, and the student was on Canvas, and he was looking at a PowerPoint presentation, but it was actually a PowerPoint presentation that was in PDF that came directly from the publisher, Pearson Education. So it was not actually something created by the instructor. It came from Pearson Education and probably was part of an electronic textbook. He wanted to print it out. And we downloaded it as a PDF, and I know there are different ways you can convert that back into a PowerPoint presentation, but even on doing that and then maybe trying to convert it like to 3 slides per page or 6 slides per page, the presentation was so darn long that it was still probably going to be about 40 pages back to back, no matter what. And he looked at me and he said, why would they do this? And I said, well, I think the intent of the publisher, because this is a publisher's, this is coming from the publisher, I said, I think the intent of the publisher is that you would be looking at this presentation online and then taking some notes. And his response was, well, I don't want to do that. So we deal with a lot of different preferences and a lot, I think, of, I wouldn't say misunderstandings, that probably isn't a good way to put it, but a lot of different ways in which information winds up being presented, and then that's kind of versus the expectations of a particular page. So kind of going back to ebooks again, there are a lot of different things that one does take into consideration. And yet again, like I said, I don't think it's wise for any of us to say, well, we're just not going to get into that area. It's just too much to deal with, because it's already here. But yeah, there's just a lot of stuff going on.
Okay, excellent.
You're welcome.
Any other questions before I have a final question for Cynthia? They're all stunned. I have one question for you.
Okay.
Dealing with databases and electronic collections, I think, is actually an extremely daunting prospect, particularly for new librarians. What is the best advice you could give somebody who's about to be a fully qualified librarian?
Oh.
How to get themselves familiar with the types of things about databases, about selection of databases, about handling databases. What would you do? What would you tell them to do?
Okay, boy, that is a great question to ask. Because the learning curve can seem, as you said, very daunting and very steep. This will probably no longer be the case 10 years from now, but this is going to sound kind of weird, but probably a good piece of advice I could give to a newly minted MLS getting ready to go into electronic resources is just even have some conversations with colleagues, if you possibly can, who have been out there kind of dealing with electronic resources for quite a long period of time. And the reason I say that is I work with relatively new librarians from time to time. And I know when I will say something such as, okay, well, you know, this database is not entirely a full-text database. Depending upon the person's background, the opportunities that they've had to deal with electronic resources and so forth, sometimes people can indeed look very surprised when I say that. And I'll say, well, that's because that was not the intention. And this database started out this way. It started out as a print index, and then full text was added, but it just simply is not intended to be a full text database, so don't be surprised if something doesn't appear in full text. I think it's interesting to have some conversations along those lines, because it's like, you know, you can just, I don't know, you can wind up having, trying to put this, it's easy to assume that everything is going to be available electronically, And it's also easy to assume that everything will always be available electronically. So I think finding out some history about how these different databases actually came to be, and then having conversations with vendors about what exactly is your database all about? What exactly does it include? Where did that information come from? PsycInfo is a good example. The information in PsycInfo actually comes from the American Psychological Association, but it is available through a variety of vendor interfaces. So have some conversations with the vendors, but spend some time thinking about where that actual data came from in the first place and how it's being made available. So asking a lot of questions, but also just if you have a chance to talk to different colleagues who have had to be dealing with library resources and electronic resources for a long time, they can give you at least some background information so that you kind of understand the history and then where these are coming from. So that's my advice.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. Well, you've given us a lot of your time and a lot of really interesting information. So thank you so much. And students, let's show some appreciation.
Well, I was really happy to be able to do this. I wish you all a wonderful rest of the afternoon. And then I'm going to go ahead and I will save this session, get it as a YouTube link, and then Dr. Smith, I'll send that to you and you can get that into Canvas.
That'll be great. Thanks so much, Cynthia, and enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. Meeting. There we go.